It was an ordinary Sunday afternoon, the kind that has the potential to stretch into lazy revelry or sink into a silent abyss, depending on the company you keep. My son Michael was hosting dinner at his home, an event I used to look forward to, filled as it was with laughter and the sweet aroma of his famous lasagna. But now the scent was merely a ghost of what it used to be, echoing through the air that seemed to suffocate me. Somehow, over the years, the light of my presence had dimmed in his eyes, replaced by shadows of irritation and impatience. As I took my usual seat at the table, the one I had occupied for years, flanked by my daughter-in-law Clara, who was never too far away from Michael, I could feel it, the silent opening of a chasm between us. Michael's conversation flowed freely around the table. There were stories shared, laughter erupting like fireworks, but not a single one of them was directed at me. In that moment, the gravity of my invisibility struck me like a cold wind sweeping through an empty room. I picked at my food, the fork trembling slightly in my unsteady hand. What had happened to the vibrant family meals that I once orchestrated, where the stories of my youth played like a soundtrack to the laughter of my children? Now every morsel I chewed felt as if it was a reminder. I was the last note in an unfinished song. I wanted to speak, to interject my own tales of wisdom, to share the years of experiences I had piled up like bricks in the foundation of my being, but every attempt was met with indifference. Each time I opened my mouth, it was as if the air was sucked out before even a word left my lips. "Mom, did you hear what I said?" Michael's voice broke through my reverie, but the irritation laced in his tone pierced deeper than any knife could. He didn't want my thoughts, he wanted a soundboard for his own ideas. I nodded absently, not really knowing what I was affirming. "Yes, dear. We're planning a trip to Europe this summer," Clara interjected with a brightness that felt like daggers. "It'll be amazing, the kids are so excited." "Oh, how lovely," I managed to say, forcing a smile on my face. What was the point in voicing how much it hurt to see their excitement, knowing I would be left behind without a second thought? They didn't seem to remember that traveling was once a cherished family experience for all of us, or perhaps they didn't care. Their plans, their excitement, filled the space where I used to reside. I shrank further into my chair, feeling like a ghost at my own family table. The meal progressed, painful conversations about vacations and projects and dreams floated around me, while I sat silently as if encapsulated in a glass box, transparent yet utterly disconnected. Their laughter echoed like a distant memory, reminiscent of how it used to feel when I was fully engaged in everything that surrounded me. "Mom," Michael said again, more sharply this time, "why don't you come visit us more? It would mean a lot." It was wrapped in a plea for engagement, but its core was a command for compliance. I felt the weight of his words, a half-hearted invitation trapping me under the suffocating weight of expectations. Did he even realize what it meant to him? Did he comprehend that it felt less like an invitation and more like a notice, a warning that I was to be present but not valued? I could feel my heart ache with the weight of all the instances in which I had tried to breach the barriers of disconnection. It wasn't simply about their lack of interest in my voice, but a profound realization that my very existence as a mother and a grandmother was now being measured against their own sweeping narratives. I was lost in their whirlwind of enthusiasm, tucked away in a corner, invisible and painfully dependent. The financial burden creeping into my thoughts made it hard to breathe, a reminder that I couldn't afford to live independently without Michael's help, particularly since my modest retirement income had dwindled with unforeseen expenses. I watched them, the vibrant family that I had once nurtured, thriving without me, while I sat here struggling to remain relevant. So many times in recent months, when bills piled up past the point of comfort, I'd lain awake in bed wondering how I could even ask for help without feeling like a burden, a nuisance even in my own home. As dessert was served, his famous almond torte, which was once a family favorite, I felt an emptiness in my chest that gnawed at my soul. I picked at the slice, my fork pushing the cake around the plate like it was a battle I was fighting within my mind. The dessert was delicious, but the sweetness was lost in the bitter tang of societal norms that dictated my worth based solely on my ability to contribute. "Mom, you seem distracted today," Clara finally remarked, her tone layered with concern that felt insincere. "Is everything okay?" I should have contradicted the observation with a smile that radiated warmth and assurance, but the truth felt as heavy as the cake in front of me. It was as if they were wanting the answer to be evident, yet I knew they did not genuinely want to hear the real story behind my quiet turmoil. "Oh, I'm fine," I braved to reply, a rehearsed line that I had used countless times before. But as I muttered those familiar words, my mind screamed, "It's not fine, nothing is fine, I'm alone, I'm wanting, I'm forgot." Their lives moved on with carefree ease, while mine felt like sand slowly slipping through my fingers. I watched my grandchildren, innocent and oblivious, but also painfully aware of the distance that had crept between me and their enjoyment of the world ahead. I saw them bask in the sunlight of familial love that I seemed so distant from. I mourned for my role as their beloved grandmother, a sentiment that had now faded from my children's eyes to a form of familial obligation. When dinner wrapped up and the laughter echoed in the corners of the room, I turned to gather my things, the laughter fading behind me as I slipped out. It was a kind of rejection I could hardly endure, but I would endure it as I had endured everything else. My heart heavy, I stepped out into the cool evening air, feeling the crisp embrace of night surround me like an old coat, albeit one that I had long since outgrown. As I waited for my ride, the loneliness almost fell on me like a shroud. I was preparing to leave once again, weighed down by the reality of my situation, stranded in a sea of love that had somehow forgotten me. In that moment, as I stood outside their home, invisible to even my own family, I could feel the looming absence of a voice that used to be strong, a voice that used to share stories and bear wisdom learned piece by piece through years of experience. Instead, I was left with nothing more than reflection, staring at an empty road ahead, devoid of confidence, shrouded in despair. It would be nights like these that forced me to confront my reality. I wondered how long I could hide behind the mask of indifference, how long I could ignore the growing shadows of resentment that encroached upon my heart. A void had emerged in the love I used to bask in, morphing into something painfully familiar. I was no longer just a mother. I was a remnant of old memories, a neglected thread in a fabric they'd woven without me. I imagined what would it be like if I disappeared completely. Would they care? Would they lament the loss, or would they simply continue with their lives unperturbed? As the headlights of my ride finally pierced through the darkness, I slipped into the car, a heavy silence settling over me. The driver, oblivious to my anguish, turned to me with a polite question, "Where to, ma'am?" "Home," I replied, but home felt like a distant concept, a place I barely recognized. Lost in thought, I closed my eyes, allowing the hum of the engine to carry me away. Beneath the pain and the suffocating sorrow of invisibility, there lay an ember of rage that flickered barely beneath the surface. I felt it simply waiting, longing for the moment when I could allow it to ignite. I couldn't live like this anymore. Something had to change. As the highway lights blurred by, I vowed to myself that I would no longer idly accept this pattern of invisibility. I would reclaim my power. It was time for the world to feel the weight of my presence once again. I had spent too long in the shadows. It was time to step into the light to demand visibility. It was not merely about showing up. It was about being seen, respected, and cherished once more. I would rise, I would strike back in the name of all the wisdom that had been ignored. And just like that, in the depths of my despair, renewed determination began to form. It may have started as a flicker, yet it was enough to remind me that my fight for dignity was far from over. I could feel the change brewing already, throughout my very being, filling the void with fire as I realized that I was more than just a name on their lips. I was a mother, a grandmother, a woman with a powerful past, and an even stronger resolve to restore what was lost. The evening air held promises of changing tides, and I would not let it slip through my fingers again. I would emerge, bold and unyielding, ready to confront the bitter truths. I would reclaim my narrative. If I was to be dismissed, then it was time to show them what I could still do, and that this was only the beginning of a greater reckoning. Seasons had changed, yet my strength remained timeless. As I oriented myself toward the light ahead, I whispered softly to myself, "I am here and I am ready." And with that, I would come to find justice in my own way. The world would know my voice once more. If Protagonist's name's story resonated with you, you're in the right place. Here at Wisdom Strikes Back, we share stories of seniors who refuse to be underestimated and prove that experience is power. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell if you believe that wisdom and dignity deserve respect. Share this video with someone who needs to remember their own strength. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated because of your age? How did you handle it? Your stories inspire our community. Thank you for watching, and remember, you are never too old to stand up for yourself. Until next time, keep proving that wisdom strikes back. As I settled into the worn fabric of my armchair, my heart ached with the weight of memories swirling in my mind. It was during a quiet morning in my modest home, once filled with laughter, that the echoes of neglect began to creep in like the shadows at dusk. My adult children, once bright-eyed and spirited in their youth, turned increasingly distant, their visits diminishing into fleeting moments primarily dictated by the demands of their own lives. I had willingly given so much of myself to them, pouring my love and resources into their well-being. Little did I know that this same love would soon become the crutch upon which their exploitation rested. Initially, the neglect was subtle. A missed phone call here, a forgotten birthday there. Each small act was a wound, a constant reminder of their indifference toward me. I held on to the hope that they were simply busy with their own families, juggling work and responsibilities. But that hope quickly morphed into desperation when I took stock of my surroundings. My home, once a sanctuary brimming with warmth, had turned into a stark reminder of abandonment. Dust began to settle on my favorite knickknacks, remnants of the past gathering solitude as their vibrant stories faded into the background. The days turned into weeks, and soon, the neglect blossomed into something far uglier: financial exploitation. One afternoon, as I sorted through what little paperwork I still managed to handle, I discovered a series of credit card charges from a company I'd never heard of. My blood ran cold as I recognized my children's names linked to the transactions, their voices whispering through my mind, promising they would look after me, ensure I wanted for nothing. It turned out to be a lie, their deceit planned meticulously behind closed doors. Initially, I confronted them gently, fearful of igniting the flames of confrontation. "I came across some charges, dear," I said to my son, Mark, the eldest, as I handed him the credit card statement with trembling hands. His reaction was immediate, a mix of aggression and indignation flooding his face. "It's just business, Mom," he snapped, his voice rough and unmerciful, cutting through the air thick with betrayal. "I'm helping you." Yet the truth loomed larger than his words. It was evident my son was using my own name for his gain. The physical manifestations of their indifference were all around me. Bills piled up on the kitchen table, and calls from collection agencies became a regular occurrence. I felt myself spiral further into a reality where the children I had raised and cherished had transformed into betrayers, hiding behind masks of sibling solidarity. An insidious cycle of public humiliation began to take form, often outside the confines of my home, revealing the ruthlessness beneath their fabricated smiles. At family gatherings, my children's cruelty became a spectacle, normalized by the family's collective silence. My son and daughter would engage in conversations about finances, each dismissal laced with sarcasm, causing laughter to erupt, often at my expense. "Mom has a habit of forgetting to pay her bills," they would jest, and the room would erupt with laughter that pierced my heart. What should have been lively discussions turned into mockery. Time and time again, I felt the warm embrace of my family tighten into chains of ridicule that bound me, squeezing tighter until breath was a luxury. I would smile back, a tight-lipped expression that masked the turmoil beneath. What could I say? Their laughter was a loud reminder of my perceived shortcomings, igniting a shame that nestled deep within my soul. Every time they made a joke, my heart sank, whispering to me that I was no longer a respected matriarch, but rather a punchline to their cruel humor. Outside the family unit, the neighborhood began to echo their sentiments. Once I was regarded with the kindness of friendly nods when traversing my modest garden or fitting my needs at the local grocery store. However, whispers grew louder. I noticed families, once eager to lend a helping hand, now avoiding eye contact as I walked by. My children cultivated a narrative, painting me as a frail old woman who couldn't manage her own affairs, a trite caricature fashioned from thin air, yet undeniably damning. I was left to navigate the twists and turns of an invisible reality shaped by their disdain. The community, blissfully unaware of the truth, became an extension of their malicious intent. I had become a ghost in my own life, haunting the periphery of conversations as my children held court over my existence. The casual comments about my waning abilities became an accepted norm, further pushing me into isolation. I would find myself sitting alone on my porch, watching life unfold around me. Children played, couples strolled hand in hand, and laughter danced through the air. I often wondered if my children could grasp that their nonchalance was not only neglecting me, but also erasing the vibrant history that accompanied my existence. I was left to question who I had become. Was I still their mother or merely a burden they wished to shed? As the months crept by, their relentless disregard escalated into something altogether more sinister: public humiliation. I could feel the sting of judgment rising as I attempted to buy groceries one fateful morning. My debit card was declined, and panic washed over me. I had no way of knowing if it had been marked unused for too long or had been part of my son's misguided financial ventures. I was unprepared for the onlookers catching word of it, their eyes widening in a horrified sympathy that stung. "My dear, are you all right?" A soft voice broke through my embarrassment. I recognized her as Mrs. Thompson from down the street, a woman I had known for years. I could only nod, my throat dry and blocked as I attempted to explain my plight. Yet I could see the gentle pity growing within her gaze, her quiet affection morphing into skepticism. And suddenly, without a word, my children emerged from the shadows, acting as valiant champions determined to shield everyone from the poor old lady who had lost her grip on reality. "Mom just needs some help to manage her money better," my daughter Linda interjected with a forced smile, oozing condescension as her eyes turned toward the observers for validation. Yet all I felt was the heavy weight of judgment settling on my shoulders. In that moment, amid the hushed whispers echoing through the store, I realized I was seen as a caricature of incompetence and vulnerability, stripped of my dignity, and there was nothing I could do to reclaim it. This humiliation was agonizing. Though I was accustomed to feeling lonely, the didactic lecture on my inadequacies hurled from the comfort of my children transformed my solitude into suffocating despair. I could feel my worth eroding, and yet I still found myself searching for reasons to justify their actions. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps I had become irrelevant, a ghost in their fast-paced lives with no solid ground to stand upon. Yet deep down, buried beneath the layers of pain and repression, a flicker of strength began to emerge. Perhaps it was my stubbornness, perhaps a lingering memory of the vivacious woman I once was whispered gently, urging me to rise and reclaim my narrative. It would take time, yes, and resilience, but something needed to shift. For every act of betrayal, I felt an inexplicable resolve grow within me, an undeniable yearning to throw back the curtain of neglect, to demand respect, not just for myself, but for the generations that would follow. As I began to embrace this determination, I saw the echo of possibility in the faces of my fellow seniors at the community center. With every shared story of injustice, of battles fought silently without recognition, our voices knitted together a strong tapestry of resilience against the tide of exploitation. We were not merely victims, we were warriors in our own right, and perhaps strength lay in the bonds we forged. With time, I would confront my children, showing them just how deep the cracks of neglect, exploitation, and humiliation ran. They needed to feel the weight of their choices, to understand the gravity of exploitation and respect, and more importantly, that the love I had always shown them should now be a two-way street. I had begun to reach for the power within me, emboldened by the knowledge that, indeed, I was not alone, a rich tapestry of wisdom and storytelling woven by those who had traversed trials of their own. All these relationships, connections, those flickers of hope, they would ignite a fire to ignite my inner strength. The moment of reckoning was drawing near, and I refused to be a silent victim any longer. As I reflected upon the path ahead, I began to see a world beyond my walls, waiting for me to reclaim my voice and tread the path to justice. If my experience resonated with you, believe me, you are not alone. As I prepare to take the steps to reclaim my narrative, I urge you to embrace your strength without reservation. Share your stories, confront your injustices, and hold fast to the family and community ties that remember and honor your dignity. 76 years of life taught me one crucial lesson: it's never truly over until we take our stand. And as I gathered my strength for the battle ahead, I pledged to never allow neglect and humiliation to define who I was. If my story resonates with you, you're in the right place. Here at Wisdom Strikes Back, we share stories of seniors who refuse to be underestimated and prove that experience is power. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell if you believe that wisdom and dignity deserve respect. Share this video with someone who needs to remember their own strength. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated because of your age? How did you handle it? Your stories inspire our community. Thank you for watching, and remember, you are never too old to stand up for yourself. Until next time, keep proving that wisdom strikes back. As I sat alone in that dimly lit room, the sounds of the outside world faded into a mere whisper, cloaked under the weight of my thoughts. Every tick of the clock seemed to echo my feelings of isolation, regret, and betrayal. My daughter, once my pride and joy, had become a source of heartache, her manipulative ways suffocating the remnants of our once close-knit bond. It was a shock I never anticipated. A mother turned foe, a heart once brimming with love now heavy with the burden of exploitation. I remember the day when I fully recognized just how far she had gone. I had just returned from the hospital after a daunting week of tests and appointments. The doctor's words still echoed in my head: "You're okay, but you need to take it easy." I wasn't a frail old woman. I was resilient, but my health was important, and so was my independence. Yet instead of being greeted with warmth, I was met with the cold draft of loneliness. My daughter barely gave me a passing glance, too busy with her husband and children to notice my struggles. Weeks passed, and what started as subtle neglect escalated into outright manipulation. My financial situation, so carefully crafted over decades, was under siege. She had convinced me that my wealth was a burden not just to myself but to the family. Those words haunted me, carving away at my resolve. With every passing month, my savings dwindled, not because of my spending, but because of the subtle thefts disguised as loans and gifts. My heart sank as I realized my retirement fund, little by little, was being siphoned off to fuel her lavish lifestyle and her insatiable greed. But vulnerability isn't just a loss of power. It can sometimes reveal a reservoir of strength hiding beneath. In that hollow and darkened room, I began to piece together the fragments of my past. Beyond the tears and regrets lay a legacy built on hard work, foresight, and wisdom accumulated through the years. And that wisdom was my greatest ally. One late afternoon, as the setting sun cast long shadows across the room, I mused upon the gems of my past, the moments I spent salvaging trinkets, saving pennies, meticulously itemizing the family finances in old notebooks. The thought hit me hard, igniting a spark I had allowed to dim over time. I envisioned my old safety deposit box with the bank, a small refuge I had relied upon, untouched for years. Could it be that among those forgotten documents lay remnants of my strategic mind? Days later, after mustering all the courage I could find, I visited that dusty bank. Walking through the familiar glass doors felt surreal, stepping back into a realm where I had always held control. I recalled the excitement I had felt when I had first opened that safety deposit box, the thrill of having a just-in-case treasure. Upon arriving at the vault, I felt the air shift. The tension of years of neglect was palpable. I hesitated, but that lingering fear was soon drowned out by the fierce need to reclaim my dignity. The box felt heavier as I lifted it free from its confines. With trembling fingers, I undid the latch, revealing a trove of carefully preserved documents and old financial statements. Among them lay my secret savings, a collection of bonds and certificates that had been collecting dust for nearly a decade. My heart raced. These weren't merely numbers on paper. They were the culmination of countless, sleepless nights of labor and foresight, a testament to my resilience. I couldn't let this newfound power sit idle. I wanted more than just a safety net. I needed a weapon that could pierce through the veil of exploitation I had endured. My heart knew the next step would not be easy, but it was necessary. I began reaching out to legal advocates who specialized in elder law. Each phone call and consultation drained me emotionally, but it also invigorated me. It was the first step in reclaiming my life, and I felt my spirit rise. With the help of my newfound allies, I discovered the kind of people who would stand beside me, motivated by a shared belief in justice for the elderly. Their wisdom was more than comforting, it was shared strength. They helped me understand not just the law, but how I could best use it to my advantage. For every obscured contract my daughter had presented as a gift, I now had evidence and documentation to counter. I reclaimed my narrative with every piece of advice and insight they shared. I realized, too, that my life experiences were more than simple anecdotes. They were jewels of wisdom that equipped me to outsmart my daughter and her machinations. I had lived through the moments that sculpted my resolve. The decades of saving every extra cent, the times I fought for justice within my community, and the lessons learned in compassion and resilience. I wielded these memories like armor, ready to confront the queen of exploitation lurking so close to me. My plan took shape gradually, a carefully crafted outline of retribution and redemption. I spent countless late nights drafting a legal notice to eject my daughter from controlling my finances, even suiting up for meetings where I presented my case. Surprisingly, my confidence rallied around me like a warm blanket, grounding me in the storm of chaos my life had become. I began sharing my story with others, sparking discussions with different community groups composed of like-minded individuals who had their own tales of mistreatment and exploitation. Then came the day of the standoff, a tense confrontation at my home where I decided to unveil my hand. I invited my daughter under the guise of discussing family matters. I remember the casual way she sauntered in, flipping through her phone, seemingly uninterested in solving any issues. But I had stakes now. I had taken the leash of control back into my own hands. As I sat across from her, a bubbling mixture of nerves and resolve churned in my stomach. I shared my findings, calmly detailing the assets I had safeguarded, revealing my knowledge of her transgressions. Her face paled, morphing into a mask of disbelief and anger. It was a potent reminder of how illusions of power can only mask the truth for so long. "What do you think you're doing, Mom?" she spat, the venom in her words bitter. "What do you think I have been doing?" I retorted, my voice steady and unwavering, emboldened by each word. With every syllable, I felt the scales tip in my favor. "While you were busy robbing me of my dignity and hard-earned savings, I was quietly amassing proof and allies who will help me reclaim what's rightfully mine." In that moment, I felt like an army within myself, bolstered not only by my strength but by the guidance I had received along the way. The realization washed over me that all those years of sacrifice had not been in vain. The wisdom I garnered over decades would be the catalyst for restoring my dignity. As my daughter attempted to counter my revelations with hollow threats and empty accusations, I reminded her that I was not merely a victim anymore. I was a force to be reckoned with. The tide had turned, and the resentment I felt began to dissolve, replaced by an overwhelming sense of clarity. I had not just unearthed financial resources, I had awakened a dormant power deep within me. The legal proceedings blared into view not as mere transactions, but as a chance to expose the true nature of the betrayal. With every meeting and every court date, I brought forth my neatly organized evidence and the supporting voices from my community allies. We stood united, a coalition of voices amplifying the call for dignity in these humble and vulnerable yet powerful years. Each document I had saved from the depths of my past worked as a breadcrumb trailing back to the kind of woman I was. A fighter, a survivor, and above all, a mother who deserved respect. The courtroom became an arena where the truth was laid bare. The whispers of the judge and the murmured objections from my daughter created an atmosphere charged with palpable tension. At that moment I stood tall, not just for myself but for every elderly person who had ever felt silenced or forgotten. How surreal it felt to flip the narrative. I no longer feared queries around my age or my worth. I was a veteran of this battle for respect. I understood now that with experience came the ability to decipher manipulation. I wielded a power sharper than any knife, my unwavering resolve. The days moved forward, my daughter's defiance began to shrink, and the fleeting moments of anger were increasingly substituted with a profound understanding of my gravity, my legacy, and the lessons that had shaped our lives. Justice would not just be a lesson for her, but a lesson echoing throughout our family. Those days of confrontation transformed into moments of solemn realization. Hers was a lesson in humility. Mine was the unearthing of wisdom and the realization that true power lies not in age, but in the strength born of life experiences. With strength now swelling within me like the tide, I shared not only the outcomes of the legal battles but also new narratives within our family. I began hosting luncheons for senior citizens, inviting them to share their stories and remind ourselves that vulnerability does not render us weak, but cultivates the strength to reclaim our lives. My journey did not end at merely conquering my daughter's manipulations. It expanded and morphed into something larger. I became a voice for my community, bridging the gaps woven deeply between generations. We gathered to empower one another, to remind each other that our age does not diminish our value, but rather enhances it. And that is how, against the odds, I turned the tides of my life. My story became more than an isolated incident of revenge. It radiated into a new way of living, a call to dignity that resonated throughout my community. In narrating my tale, I became a testament to the knowledge that experience beats youth, and wisdom always strikes back when least expected. If my story resonated with you, you're in the right place. Here at Wisdom Strikes Back, we share stories of seniors who refuse to be underestimated and prove that experience is power. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell if you believe that wisdom and dignity deserve respect. Share this video with someone who needs to remember their own strength. Tell us in the comments, have you ever been underestimated because of your age? How did you handle it? Your stories inspire our community. Thank you for watching, and remember, you are never too old to stand up for yourself. Until next time, keep proving that wisdom strikes back. I had spent my entire life being a silent observer in my own narrative, letting the whims of others dictate my actions, my worth, and my place in this world. When I was younger, I had dreams of becoming an artist, pouring my heart onto canvas, but life had a way of shaping us into something different than we envisioned for ourselves. I built a family, raised children, and poured love into nurturing them, believing that they would grow to cherish the values of kindness and respect I had endeavored to instill in them. But as the years aged me, those values diminished in the eyes of those I had sacrificed so much for. Amongst the people I loved most, I became invisible. Of course, it started slowly enough. A dismissive comment about my forgetfulness or my reliance on a cane. Then came the harder blows, the subtle manipulation of my finances, the neglect when I fell ill, and ultimately the betrayal I had always feared. It was a dark day when I found myself receiving an eviction notice, a culmination of the slow erosion of my independence by my son, Ethan, and his wife, Jenna. They had taken to stealing my social security checks, convincing me I didn't need those funds for bills as I was now living with family, and even going so far as to discourage my friends from visiting. It was a sycophantic dance they engaged in, as both offered me false comforts while tightening their grip around my very essence, my dignity, my home, and my heart. It wasn't until I sat on the floor of my soon-to-be-empty home, clutching a tattered picture of my younger self and my late husband, that I understood I had been wrong. This was my life. I had invested everything into it. I didn't have to let them define my worth or dictate the narrative of my old age. The quiet resolve I thought had faded from my spirit began to spark anew. The years of neglect simmered into a fire of discontent that could no longer be ignored. I had a power they didn't see coming. I knew things that they weren't privy to, and things that could disrupt the careful web of deception they had spun around me. As I stood to gather whatever belongings I could, my thoughts began to crystallize. I wasn't merely a victim in this circumstance. I was a vessel of history, knowledge, and resilience. I had lived through periods of hardship that had shaped societies. I had weathered loss that could knock the breath from even the steeliest of hearts, and now I would channel that legacy. I began to contemplate a plan as I fought the tears that brimmed at my eyelids. It was time to reclaim my narrative. I started to dig through old family documents, photographs long since buried, receipts hidden in drawers that connected to properties my husband had held before passing. There was a house in a neighborhood he had invested in, a small cottage that had grown more valuable over the years. I didn't have the heart to tell my children about it. I had saved that disclosure for a more opportune moment. But now it was a key to my freedom. Phones were placed hastily in my hands as I reached out to lawyers, old friends from community homes, and local advocacy groups. I made my voice heard in those conversations, crafting a new narrative for myself where I was no longer the feeble matriarch begging for mercy. I recounted my story, laying out the machinations my family had employed to undermine me, how they had sown seeds of doubt and fear among friends, how the trauma of losing my autonomy had pressured me into silence. I amassed paperwork to support my claims, each signature a testament to my resolve and the injustices I had faced. As the days turned into weeks, a sense of calm washed over me. I became a conductor of my destiny, orchestrating a symphony of justice that echoed well beyond the confines of my home. The hard work led to me becoming acquainted with an activist group dedicated to elder rights, and they extended support that transcended mere emotional encouragement. They provided contacts and offered my story a platform, an opportunity to shine a light on the dark corners of exploitation my children had cast me into. Community newspapers began to publish my story. I became a pillar of resilience, an unexpected champion for those seniors who had faced similar struggles. I knew I would face backlash from those close to me once the truth began to unravel. Ripe with denial and unable to comprehend that their actions had rigged our familial foundations, Ethan met with me one evening after he caught wind of the articles surfacing in the community. I watched the incredulity unfold in his expression, an array of feelings covered by a thin veil of righteous indignation. "Mama, I can't believe you would do this to me. You don't need to air our family's dirty laundry. Just let it go. You knew we were here for you." He tried to placate me, but I sensed the tremor in his voice, the quaver of a man caught in his own net of deception. "Ethan, I've spent my entire life letting you dictate what's right for me. I won't let you continue on this path. I have powerful allies now. Did you think I wouldn't discover what was happening? How could I ever trust you again?" I said, my tone low and steady. He flinched at my words but desperately attempted to retain control. "You're hurting the family's reputation. What are people going to think? Do you have any idea what this will do to our lives?" I made a deliberate choice, one that rippled beyond the sacred bond of mother and son. "No, Ethan. I knew I was hurting ours, but you're the one who has shamed this family's name, stealing from your own mother. You and Jenna are the architects of this misery." That evening I was steely resolve personified. I continued onward, fortified by my sense of self-worth. I would no longer be the target of their disdain, their manipulation. The narrative shifted. Each call I made, every interaction I had with friends and family, morphed my identity in their eyes. I was no longer only their mother, but a woman who had discovered an inner strength, an unrelenting tide poised to wash over their deception. The blossoming coalition of support around me became untenable for Ethan and Jenna. They couldn't comprehend the loss of power until finally, they ripped the thin curtain back to reveal their trapping actions. As the news spread, I watched in satisfaction as whispers turned into public discourse. I arranged a small community meeting outside my soon-to-be former home, inviting local journalists, seniors, and advocates. Everyone was there. My old friends, neighbors, and even relatives surprised to find injustices pooling around my doorstep. When I stepped up to that makeshift podium they had fashioned with care, I felt years of silence erupt through my voice. I stand here not as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience. What I have endured is not just a personal tragedy, it is an alarming reflection of the pervasive neglect experienced by many older Americans. My family has tried to rob me of my identity, to cloak me in silence and shame because they fear my voice. But now, I use it to reclaim my autonomy. The response was electric. My neighbors rallied behind me, offering their own stories of battles fought and won. As they stood to speak, my heart swelled at the support cascading upon me like an unbreakable wave of unity. An evening meant to reveal sorrow morphed into a celebration of strength, each of us united in our resolve and determination to forge a path to justice. In the following weeks, I received the court date to address my eviction notice. The morning of the hearing, my stomach churned with nervous energy, but a strange excitement fluttered beneath it all. I wasn't alone this time. I stood among a group of those who had shared their own stories of overcoming family betrayal. Together, we embodied a shifting paradigm. Our struggles highlighted the need for systemic change. As I took the stand, I realized that everything had led to this moment, the culmination of loss and strength and morality buried in familial deception. I stood tall and spoke clearly. I laid out the truth about my financial abuse, the emotional toll it took on my well-being, and the psychological manipulation imposed by those who should have loved and cared for me the most. The courtroom was silent. Every person listening leaned in as I bore my soul. I countered each of Ethan's assertions with evidence that traced the trajectory of the emotional turmoil I had faced. I detailed my husband's legacy through properties and finances he had left in trust for me. Ethan sat across from me, his body tense, shock clouded in his eyes. Instantaneously, a bottomless glee surged through me. This was not just a reclamation of my finances, it was the resurrection of my identity. This was my moment of justice, my declaration of independence. I was no longer ensnared in a false narrative. The verdict came with a painful ripple through the air. The judge ruled in my favor. My eviction notice was invalid. My son's manipulations were highlighted as deceitful. It was over. My home remained mine. My heart felt a resonance of relief mixed with anticipation for the road ahead. I had taken back control, and in doing so, I paved the way toward healing that ran deeper than the material. It began to unfurl like petals of a flower laying dormant, finally at last toward light. But justice was not merely about reclaiming my home. I pressed on with my plans to publish a memoir about my insights and experiences, the lessons garnered through years of personal betrayal and systemic neglect of seniors. Each chapter served as a beacon for others who felt overshadowed or isolated, providing a roadmap for reclaiming identities often lost along the way. Ethan and Jenna were left shocked, bereft of their illusion of superiority. They had imitated the very structure of power and family love they had so vehemently depended on. But in time, the truth would emerge even in their lives. The consequences of our actions echo, reverberating through generations like waves on the shore, leaving imprints of clarity on the sand. As for me, I photograph moments of strength and community support, filling my heart with warmth. The elders I once thought were lost to neglect became champions, standing beside me as we forged friendships that reignited embers of joy. Together, we shared not only stories but boundless hope for any elder who had been misunderstood or silenced. Life shifted, the narrative became ours, a tapestry woven through shared wisdom. We stood as living examples that the days of silence were numbered. I knew it was a beginning and not an end. Justice had been served, and in hoisting my story from the depths of neglect, I restored dignity not just to myself, but to the growing community of elders who dared to challenge their fates. Seizing my voice brought clarity that the realities I had endured at the hands of my family existed, but did not define me. I had turned that pain into power, nominally and ultimately. If my story resonates with you, you're in the right place. Here at Wisdom Strikes Back, we share stories of seniors who refuse to be underestimated and prove that experience is power. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell if you believe that wisdom and dignity deserve respect. Share this video with someone who needs to remember their own strength. Tell us in the comments, have you ever been underestimated because of your age? How did you handle it? Your stories inspire our community. Thank you for watching, and remember, you are never too old to stand up for yourself. Until next time, keep proving that wisdom strikes back. As I sat on the porch of my modest home, sipping my tea, I couldn't help but think about how far I had come. The pain of betrayal, the sting of abandonment, and the scars of exploitation were still fresh in my mind, but I had emerged from the storm stronger than I ever believed I could be. The events of the past several months had transformed not only my life, but also the dynamics within my family. I was no longer just the elderly aunt they could mistreat. I had found my voice, and with it my dignity. The legal battles were intense and drawn out, but perseverance became my ally. I remember the day I received that fateful letter from my legal team. It confirmed everything I had hoped for. My claim against my nephew and his wife for fraud and exploitation wouldn't just be heard, it would be recognized. Their attempts to siphon funds from my accounts had been exposed, and with them, their web of deceit had crumbled. It wasn't the money that mattered to me, it was the principle. To feel that I was seen, heard, and validated after years of being discarded like a piece of old furniture was a triumph in and of itself. Once the dust began to settle after the court's decision, I could feel the ripples of my actions throughout my family. My nephew, Stephen, and his wife, Linda, initially projected confidence. They thought they could intimidate me, that my age and frailty would keep me silent. But as justice unfolded, I witnessed their slow unraveling. They lost not only the case but also their standing in the family. The facade they had built around themselves began to crack as my brother and sister-in-law, who had initially sided with them, started to see through the lies. My brother, Harold, was particularly hurt when he learned about the extent of their deceit. This was more than a legal matter. It was family honor being questioned, and for a man like him who had spent his life valuing integrity, it was a bitter pill to swallow. I still remember the first family gathering after the ruling. The tension in the air was palpable. Stephen stormed into the room, refusing to meet my gaze. His arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a man grappling with the reality of his actions. My niece, Emily, who had been somewhat supportive during the whole ordeal, hesitated at the threshold. I could sense her confusion. She was torn between loyalty to her parents and the undeniable truth she had started to uncover about their morality. The once happy gatherings filled with laughter and warmth now felt like walking on eggshells. I could almost hear the family dynamics reshaping themselves, their connections morphing into something less superficial and more profound. As the evening progressed, small pockets of conversation began to form. I noticed my sister-in-law making polite conversation with the other relatives, but there was a discernible shift. I could overhear murmurs of support, whispers of admiration directed my way. "Did you hear about how she stood her ground?" one cousin said, her voice filled with surprise and respect. That woman is a force to be reckoned with, another chimed in, and for the first time in many years I felt the warmth of acknowledgement wash over me. In those small exchanges, I found fleeting glimpses of my restored dignity. It was an odd feeling to know that my journey had profoundly affected others. I knew that a younger me would have shrunk in the face of their scrutiny, hiding my past struggles, but now I stood tall, my posture reflecting newfound strength. I met their gaze, allowing a quiet confidence to radiate. I was no longer a victim, I was a testament to resilience. As the evening wore on and the light began to fade, I watched as Stephen tried to explain his actions to anyone who would listen. "I was merely trying to help her, you know," he asserted, his tone tinged with defensiveness. But the words rang hollow, echoing in a void where sincerity should have stood. It was clear to me that he was attempting to rewrite history as if the court's decision didn't exist. However, it was not just the ruling that would determine his fate within the family, but also his character and the real repercussions of what he had done. The toxic environment he had cultivated began to fracture, exposed for what it was. A web of lies held together by ego and entitlement. As the gossip spread among family members, I could see the shifting allegiances. Where once stood a confident nephew was now a man backed into a corner, grappling with the truth and struggling to maintain his place. I wouldn't say I felt satisfied by it all. I felt vindicated that my actions had not only unveiled my worth, but also questioned the values that had been upheld for so long. Integrity was a cornerstone that I would now fight to uphold, regardless of my family's history of frequent moral ambiguity. Though my victory was mine alone, it had ripple effects throughout our extended family as well. I began volunteering at the local community center after finding a newfound sense of purpose. My experiences and the lessons learned during my journey prompted me to help other seniors who had faced, or were facing, exploitation in their lives. The power of storytelling became my weapon, and I would listen to tales of neglect, of family betrayal, of wheelchairs being shoved away and spirits being crushed. I could see myself in their stories, and with every word exchanged, I felt my resilience deepening. I learned that my strength could empower others. Witnessing the transformation of my own life fueled my ambition to be a beacon for those who found themselves lost in the shadows of their own families. At one of the meetings, I shared my tale of entrapment and release. Seniors from all walks of life gathered, eager for someone to lift their voices. I could feel their eyes on me as I described my battle, how I had been dismissed, isolated, and then awakened with resolve. They listened, rapt, absorbed by not only my trials but the hint of triumph woven through my story. "You have that strength too," I urged them, feeling tears well as I spoke. The words resonated, urging a spark of hope in their tired eyes. As my identity transformed, I noticed the ongoing shift in the family once again. My brother and sister-in-law began to rally around me. They were children raised in an era that maintained strict decorum, often placating those in power. But they had seen the damage that complacency could do. Harold, once reluctant to confront our family's injustices, stepped into a leadership role to help me advocate for those whose voices were silenced. Our meetings turned into family bonding sessions, where we all strategized how to make our family stronger, not just as individuals, but as a unit collected for a common cause. They were my support system in ways I had never anticipated, transforming from external allies to essential partners in my ongoing fight for fairness. As the months turned into years, I pondered the transformations that had occurred. There were moments of hesitation when I questioned whether our relationships would ever be the same. I always recalled the sting of betrayal, and I knew it wouldn't vanish overnight, but hope began to brew. We forged new ties, built on transparency, respect, and mutual support. Even Stephen, weary of the weight of his actions, began reaching out, seeking counsel from me about the future. "I don't want to stay on this path," he said one evening over coffee, the distance between us bridged by his admission of regret. While I did not have all the answers, I sensed a shift within him. It was as if the scales were beginning to tilt in his mind, the burden of guilt making him heavier with each passing day. Perhaps we were both learning that redemption starts with acknowledgement, that dignity isn't merely given. It is earned through the trials of honesty and understanding. We became two people navigating rough waters, not enemies but fellow travelers on